Donkey Kong Bananza has been out for a couple weeks now, and it's incredible. I've never really played a Donkey Kong game before, not including the 3 seconds I spent on Nintendo Switch Online. But I would say this is a fantastic true introduction to the series. As you all could probably tell, Mario Odyssey is my favorite game ever made, and Donkey Kong Bananza is extremely similar to it. To the point where I would understand calling it Mario Odyssey 2, since structurally the games feel nearly identical. And they both got Pauline. I just recently finished 100%ing the game and I enjoyed nearly every minute of it, so I knew that I just had to make a video. Yes, I know that this video will likely flop due to not being about Mario or Minecraft, but I didn't do it for views.
I did it for me. I liked it.
But then the question became what to make a video on. I did have an idea, but unfortunately, that one might take a while. So I thought, why not start by ranking all of the game's layers. This is of course an extremely early first impression on each level, and my opinions may change in the future, but I thought it'd be fun to go through my thoughts on each of them immediately coming off of my first playthrough. There are 17 different layers in this game. Just like how there are 17 kingdoms in Odyssey. See, I told you they're the same game.
I am not crazy.
I'll be judging these levels based on how much I like the theme and how enjoyable they were to explore and collect bananas in. Now before we really start the list here, I just want to give a massive spoiler warning. I'm sure a lot of you will ignore that and keep watching anyway, but there are definitely some moments in this game that you all will appreciate a lot more if you don't get spoiled. But with all that said, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. To continue with our Mario Odyssey comparisons, Donkey Kong Bananza also pretty much has 3 different sizes for its layers. There are the large layers that have 61 fossils, the medium-sized layers with just 30, and the mini layers with no fossils. There is a bit more variation in this game than just that, but we'll cover the exceptions when we get to them. Just like in Mario Odyssey, most of the mini layers are definitely the weakest simply because they don't have that much content. Unlike in Mario Odyssey though, they thankfully did not give one of the coolest themes to these mini levels, so none of these really feel like missed opportunities. Not naming any names. Of the 17 layers in this game, I think there are pretty much only 2 reasonable options for what can take the bottom spot. Those are the Divide and the Junction. Just by looking at their names, it's extremely obvious that these are meant to be between areas for the game. While they do have a couple bananas each, with the Divide having 10 and the Junction having 15, that is far lower than almost any other layer. The theme behind both of these also isn't that interesting. It works for what it's supposed to be, but nothing more than that. So the question is, which of these 2 is the worst? You could simply judge them based on the banana count, but I'd rather look at the highlight of each layer since a difference of 5 bananas isn't really that big. The Divide basically acts as a way to choose which layer you're going to go to next, so you have the choice between the freezer layer and the forest layer. The Junction acts as a way to make sure you did both before letting you fight Void Kong for the first time. So really this comes down to if I enjoyed the choice aspect or the boss fight aspect more. The boss fights in Bananza suck. There are some exceptions to this which we'll cover later, but a majority of the bosses in this game are sadly pretty bad. It's definitely my biggest gripe with Bananza overall. That includes the boss fight against Void Kong in the Junction, because for whatever reason they make you teleport across several different layers to fight him, which just feels repetitive and tedious. The Divide is at least not annoying, and I do think being able to choose where you go to next is a bit cooler. So I think for my ranking today, I'm going to say 17th belongs to the Junction, and 16th belongs to the Divide. Both are still 100% the weakest layers, but I do think the Divide gets to squeeze by just a little bit. 15, the Landfill layer. Here we have our first medium-sized layer, and I just didn't love this one. The theme for this is pretty much the entire thing is filled with dirt, so you have to dig around to find pretty much anything. Shockingly though, a big mound of dirt is not really the most interesting theme. Even when you do manage to break into a few of the more open areas underground, it's just a mess of trash and overall really isn't that memorable. This also is not helped by the fact that we spend literally the entire game mining, so this layer really doesn't have anything going for it. It is where the eels we see throughout the game come from, and while that is kind of interesting I guess, it's not really impactful gameplay wise. I mean, you do follow a lot of the baby eels here, but that's not really fun. I would be very shocked if this cracked the top half of literally anyone's list. More like Landfiller layer. It does get to be above our last 2 though, because it does at least have 30 fossils to collect and a higher banana count at 27. 14, the Hilltop layer. I think this layer may be my first sort of controversial one in the list, but I honestly can't really think of a better place for it. It's another medium-sized layer with 38 bananas to find and collect. It's one of the most generic levels in the game I'd say, mostly being a pretty open plain with just a few highlights like the giant stone bananas. This does act as our first introduction to the Fractones, but since they appear in pretty much every level in the game, that hardly makes this layer very unique. Now one difficult task task I had to face while making this video is just the fact that a lot of the bananas in this game really aren't memorable. This is another thing I definitely think Mario Odyssey does better. Point to any kingdom in that game and I can list several moons that I either loved or at least remembered. Do the same for Bananza though, and despite playing through the game literally yesterday as of writing this, I would struggle to give you an answer. Maybe that's just because I have a lot more playtime in Odyssey, but I feel like the moons just had more variety there, which made each individual one stand out more. The reason I bring that up is because I'm really struggling to think of what I even did in this layer at all. Maybe it's just the dementia talking, I don't know. This did have the pretty cool set of bananas referencing Donkey Kong Country, so I can at least give it points for that. I just don't think this level is really going to end up being anyone's favorite due to the fairly basic theming. 13, the racing layer. And here we go back to another mini layer, but I found this one to be much more interesting than the two we saw at the bottom of the list. This actually has a much stronger theme as it's based around a race course. Not only that, but this layer also lets us meet up with Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong. I think they act as cute throwbacks and I'm pretty happy they got to show up here. You know me, I love pointing at my screen when I get the reference. Obviously the main thing holding this layer back is the short banana count at only 10, but this does make up for that by having a very memorable pair of bananas with the race itself. This is the only place in the game where we can ride Rambies, so that makes this layer and set of bananas pretty unique. The controls are pretty difficult to get a hold of, but once you do, the race can be pretty fun. I especially like using Rambi's takeoff feature to skip corners. The general vibe of the layer is great too, especially with the giant trophy looming over the whole thing. I'm sure some would disagree with this being higher than a few of the medium layers, but I think this was memorable and fun enough to deserve this high placement. I can't believe this makes Bananza a better racing game than Mario Kart World. 12, the resort layer. Now I think we are really starting to pick up a bit with these layers. I'm always a big fan of beach vibes, and that's exactly what the resort layer gives us. The giant cubic fruit placed everywhere is a really cute way of spicing up the aesthetic, and I also like how when you mine it, you can see Donkey Kong take a bite of the terrain. On top of just its looks, this also acted as an introduction to the floaty rainbow material that you can pick up and fly with. I had a lot of fun maneuvering around the layer with this, especially when trying to get on top of the big melon in the center. Now I am a little sad that when you get up there, the big melon is permanently broken. I thought it acted as a good centerpiece, so it was kinda sad to see it go. Aside from the fun journey to climb the big melon, there's not a ton to explore here. This is a medium-sized layer with 42 bananas, but it felt pretty straightforward exploring around it. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Donkey Kong can't dive underwater, so unlike the Seaside Kingdom in Mario Odyssey, they couldn't really hide anything in the water itself. And that just made the water here act as a minor annoyance to get between areas with bananas for me. The water controls in this game aren't bad, so it wasn't painful or anything, especially if you decide to turf surf, but I think this does hold the layer back from going up too much higher. 11, Ingot Isle Cave-In. And here we've made it to the very first level of the game. I think this acts as a strong introduction. For a game all about mining, what better place to start than in a mine shaft? This does a great job setting you right into the game by giving you a lot to destroy and look for. I spent a ton of time here just destroying the terrain to not only get used to the controls, but also collect a ton of gold. Obviously this can be done in literally every layer of the game, but I think it was important to get the first area right, and they absolutely did. I also like how a lot of the colors here are supposed to be reminiscent of the first Donkey Kong game, more specifically with the girders placed all over the place. This is also a small thing, but I liked how as you make your way up to the top, you can see some skeletons lying around. I noticed that on my first playthrough, and then I thought it was cool how at the end of the level, it shows one of those skeletons being brought back to life. That's not a huge thing, but I thought it was cool. After the game is complete, this area also gets a lot more content, totaling 36 bananas. This is technically a mini kingdom due to not having any fossils, but due to that banana count, it's a lot more like a medium in my head. Some of the added content here is really strong, like a boss rush and a sort of enemy rush, which combines a lot of the enemy challenge rooms from throughout the game. I would say those sets of bananas did carry this layer quite far in the ranking, but like I said, there's still a lot outside of that as well due to being the game's starting point. 10, the Forbidden Layer. This acts as the game's penultimate level, and while visually it wasn't the craziest for me, mechanically I had a lot of fun here. There are two main gimmicks that are present throughout. The first we see right away with the blinking blocks. To put it in Mario terms for you all, this level essentially has the blinking blocks from Mario 3D World, which will turn on and off every few seconds. However, to make it fit with Bananza, instead of disabling when it blinks, it instead changes material. That makes the blinking pretty fun to work with, especially in areas where you have to try and climb it before it becomes too slippery, or destroy it before it becomes too hard to break. The second main gimmick though, I find to be even more fun. Once you break out of the underground and find some bractones, they tell you to but if you're rich enough, you can still travel through the layer. At first it may seem like there's nothing you can do, at least until you try and throw something. This will make a pathway in the direction you threw the object in, which is such a cool gimmick and totally different from anything else seen in the rest of the game. I also love when the area you can throw stuff in begins to move, which makes traversal a bit more interesting as you have to be extra careful. Using these bridges allows you to progress and find different fossils and bananas floating around all over the place. Even if this layer doesn't have a ton of bananas at just 25, I found the exploration fun enough to bring this up fairly high. We also of course have to mention the boss boss fight against Void Kong here. While I still don't love it, it's a massive improvement over the one we saw in the junction since it all takes place in this layer. I also like how we can't use our Bananza forms here because we have to avoid singing and waking up the core. I feel like the Bananza forms made boss fights far too easy, so restricting them from us was a good idea. This layer also features this game's big plot twist, but I'm gonna save talking about that until we get to the final layer. Again, spoilers. 9. The Groove layer. This was definitely my favorite medium-sized kingdom. First off, the way it slots into the game's story is great. Pauline was just stolen from DK and then he gets locked behind bars. But luckily, DK is all about breaking stuff, so you could just break right out of your jail cell. I also love how the Fractones just say you're a nice guy and let you go despite literally breaking out of jail. Once you and Poppy Kong exit this area, you get to see the main disco, and I love the look at this. The bright white is so unique from any level in both this game and Mario Odyssey. Sure, this layer uses mining a lot less than most of the other areas, but I think that made this a nice change of pace. It was fun making my way through the entire area to bring music back to the disco. I also thought it was cute how the disco balls were used to hide several fossils and bananas. Those are some perfect hiding spots. Speaking of fossils, this layer also included a unique area that lets us look at all of our collected fossils from throughout the game. I think that's a great touch, and it's really cool to see all the giant fossils near each other. The last main note I wanted to make about this layer is the rescue of Pauline inside the eel. I really like this part as it used the diving mechanic quite well, as you have to try and aim your punches to launch the stones at the correct spots. Not sure if this does classify as a boss fight, but it was certainly enjoyable. Overall, even if there were only 30 bananas here, this is a pretty enjoyable layer due to the very unique vibe. But now is where the list gets incredibly difficult. All that we have left are the game's large layers, with one of them getting a bit of an asterisk. I think they nailed all 8 of these, so it was extremely difficult to decide on an order here. Each of them felt equally fun to explore and all had a ton of unique gimmicks. I would 100% understand placing any of these layers at any place in this top 8. Even if your favorite layer is in 8th place, keep in mind that I still think it was incredibly good. But what did I put as 8th place? That would be 8, the Freezer layer. This is of course every platformer's legally required snow level. More specifically though, this has a heavy emphasis on ice cream. While that is a cool touch, I don't think it does a phenomenal job making this stand out. It's sort of like how the water in Bubblaine is sparkling water. Like sure, it's technically unique, but it's not a huge noticeable detail. Instead, the thing that I would class as the big thing to set this apart is the fact that a lot of the layer also uses lava. So you'll go from a harsh blizzard outside to the harsh heat of lava inside. I think that works as a good mix, though it's not the most unique idea in the world. They ripped off my Mario Maker level. It does work quite well in this game though, as ice can actually make lava disappear, which leads to a lot of this layer having fun puzzles where you have to try and get rid of the lava. I especially like anything using the ice cream machines, those are always a lot of fun. And of course, on top of all of this, we have our first layer to give us a Bananza form with the zebra. This lets you run fast, which works well with the crumbling bridges found all across the layer. It's not my favorite of the abilities by a long shot, but it's still fun to use. Though I do have to say they're a little evil. Showing that you can run on water in the tutorial and then having the water in this layer kill you for trying is a little bit cruel. As for boss fights here, I didn't mind the fight against the Inflaminite. It was still pretty easy, but using the zebra form to chase it down was a good use of the ability. I will say though, I did not like Poppy Kong's fight. In concept, her becoming invisible and us having to hit her out of that is fine, but I feel like it just didn't work for me. Like I would hit her several times and she would just not take any damage and jump away. I'm probably being an idiot, but I still don't know what I was doing wrong. So yeah, this was certainly a really good layer. I just think the others on the list were more unique and fun for me personally. 7. The Lagoon layer. This was the first real layer of the game. Obviously Ingot Isle was our introduction, but this is when we really get to break away and start to explore. To go with that, theming wise this is a bit more basic, but I still quite like the vibe. The bright yellow and green color scheme worked pretty well for me, and it just made exploring around here pretty chill. This also acts as our first major introduction to bombs. Obviously, explosives are used all throughout the game, so having us learn about how to use them here is pretty important for the rest of the playthrough. Once you move down to the lower portion, I really like how this layer shapes up through the story. You have to go around unplugging water that was sealed off by Void Kong, and as you do so, more water fills the layer below. That then gives you access to more and more areas, which felt very rewarding. With that said, I also liked how a lot of the areas off to the side could still be reached with some parkour, which I thought was nice as it gave me some practice with the mechanics for the rest of the game. Also, breaking the monkey's boats was really fun. Speaking of main story, this layer not only gives us the very first Bananza, but also frees Pauline from her odd rock form. Pauline is one of my favorite Mario characters, and I thought she was great in this game, so I'm really happy they included her, even if it sort of breaks everything we knew about the Mario timeline. MatPat was right. The DK Bananza form is also great here. It's the most basic of the 5, but I think having one that just acts as a more powerful version of DK's moveset works really well. It was probably the one I used the most in my playthrough, so I have to give it credit there. Now, of the large layers, this does have the least amount of bananas at 56, so while that does hold this back a bit, I still thought this was more fun than the freezer layer. Oh, I forgot to mention, that one has 87 bananas. I think I really do have dementia. 6, the forest layer. Of course, another pretty common level trope is the forest level, and I always quite like when it shows up. I do definitely think Odyssey handled its forest theme better, but I mean, it's kinda hard to beat Steam Gardens. What Donkey Kong Bananza has for us still certainly isn't bad. The main focal point of the kingdom is the hotel, though I do think they could have expanded on it just a bit more. I like the idea quite a bit, it just doesn't feel fully utilized as we don't spend very long in the hotel. Most of the kingdom is in the outdoors forest, but luckily I still found exploring around this to be quite enjoyable. Climbing around all of the tall trees is great, and I especially like trying to find ways around the thorns circling around many of the logs. One other gimmick this level introduces are the seeds, which can attach to wood and then sprout into a big beanstalk to walk across. I found that to be a lot of fun to explore with, and there are a decent amount of bananas that use this gimmick quite well. As you dive down further into the layer, poison starts to become a bit more prominent. This is sort of like a reverse version of what we saw in the Lagoon layer, where you have to spend a lot of time draining the poison instead. I thought that was also a fun touch to make progression a bit more enjoyable. One other major aspect about this layer that I'm a bit more mixed on are the red thorns. These will appear all over the place, and if you try to punch them, you'll get stabbed. This did lead to a few fun areas where you had to try and destroy them using your surroundings, though there were definitely also points where they got a bit annoying. Sometimes they would just appear while you're trying to run around, or other times they would be a ton in your way. You do eventually get used to them though, especially since we spend a long time in this layer as it has 83 bananas. On top of all this, there are still two pretty big highlights that I wanted to bring up. First is of course the ostrich Bananza, which I didn't use a ton throughout the game, but I do still like the ability to glide. Secondly though, I did actually really enjoy this layer's boss. It would shoot out platforms towards you, so you would have to navigate around the thorns and poison to try and hit it. This would repeat several times, with each path getting more and more difficult, so this actually felt like a pretty substantial and fun fight. So even though I did have some aspects I didn't love here, that helped boost this level a good amount in the ranking. 5, the Radiance layer. The main gimmick for this level all has to do with lighting. Throughout this layer, you'll find several enemies that are completely invincible to your attacks. The only way to defeat them is to expose them to light, which I thought was pretty creative. It also fits really well with the canonical role of this layer to provide artificial light to every other layer, which I thought was a really cute detail. They get pretty creative with how the lighting is used throughout the course as well. Eventually we start to see glowstone come into the mix, which we can use as a weapon or to light up different areas. I especially liked the puzzles where you could take the light-based rocks for yourself to zipline across different areas due to the stone being indestructible. There are several different ways throughout the layer this is used, which I thought made this an extremely well-used gimmick. On top of that, as you move further down, you begin to even see the opposite. Enemies that are invincible in the light, so you have to shroud them in darkness. These two types of enemies and materials combined just led to a lot of fun lighting-based puzzles. Not to mention the different light levels throughout the layer also give a pretty nice vibe. We're also on our 4th layer in a row to reward us with a brand new Bananza form, though I do think the snake here is probably the weakest. It allows you to jump high and slow down time. I really didn't use this too much throughout the game unless it was mandatory, especially because as he moves, he has to hop around. And also Snake DK haunts my nightmares. Aside from that, I enjoyed that the boss fight here also tried to incorporate lighting stuff as well, though since it's against Grumpy Kong, it's still absurdly easy. Really great puzzles all around in this kingdom though. They get extremely creative with all of the lighting throughout, and there's plenty of opportunities seeing as there are 76 bananas to be found in this layer. 4, the Tempest layer. The vibes of this layer are great, taking place during a big storm. In fact, we actually have to deal with a lot of different weather here. The main starting area is in a pretty basic rainstorm, but as we move down, we then get faced with lava rain. This is pretty unique as you have to try and find something to hide under or you get burned alive. And then once you move even further down, you are faced with a thunderstorm, though I did find this one to be slightly more annoying since it forces you to constantly move around to avoid getting struck. The main highlight though is of course the Bananza form you get here, which is probably the most broken one in the entire game. The elephant is so much fun to destroy literally everything with, and they do a good job of showing how that can be useful throughout this layer. Any area with lava can be quickly dealt with by vacuuming it up, and honestly I thought it was really fun to do that as well. I really liked how this layer's giant fossil was buried in the lava too to show this off. For pretty much every level after this, I tried to abuse the elephant's power as much as possible. I especially found it very funny to use on these challenges since it can destroy everything in mere seconds. Outside of just the transformation here, there's still a good amount of content with a total of 70 bananas. This layer also uses a lot of zip lines for transportation, which I found to be quite fun, especially jumping off the lines early to get a collectible. The boss fight here against the sinister Bluster Wing was kinda mid though. I like the idea of having to shoot down the wings, but it just felt like it went by a bit too quickly. Still though, the vibes of this kingdom in the dark gloomy storm are fantastic, and I of course love the elephant as well, so I'm keeping this quite high up. By the way, I hate this Fractone, I hope he dies. 3, the canyon layer. Now when I put this up here on my list, my brother told me I was an insane person, so if you agree with me that this layer is good, make sure to call him out in the comments. Anyway, this acts as our first true introduction to minecarts, which we use all throughout the layer. This is made up of several floating islands, and each of them has a pretty good amount of content to explore with a total of 80 bananas. Due to these islands floating separately as well, it was extremely fun to try and jump between some of them using this game's fun parkour mechanics. Just barely snagging onto this island was definitely one of my favorite moments from my playthrough. I also just really like the vibe here. I don't really know how to describe it past being a canyon, but it felt great just looking around the scenery here. Unfortunately, the first boss against Grumpy Kong is extremely weak. Like, this was the first real sign of how mediocre this game's bosses were gonna be. I literally beat it within a few seconds, and I don't think I was even trying all too hard. Once you beat him though, you unlock the lower levels of this layer, and I once again really like how this looks. It was pretty fun to move across all the different islands here with the minecart again, especially since we're able to throw bombs as we do it. That comes to a head with the layer's final boss being against the Mad Mixer, and I actually really liked this one. It was a great test of aiming with the minecart, making this actually one of my favorite fights in the game. So sure, this layer may be on the simpler side, but I really enjoyed all of the minecart movement and just how much content was here in general. 2. Click off the video now if you have not played the game. The Planet Core. I think for the entirety of this layer, I had my hands up because this was absolute cinema. So real quick, we have to take a look back at the Forbidden layer because the big plot twist is that Void Kong is not the main villain. Out of nowhere, King K. Rool himself, after not showing up in a game besides Smash Bros. In decades, reveals himself as the main threat. I knew that people were theorizing that he might be back, but actually seeing that come true, and not just as a cameo, was extremely cool. This entire layer acts as a build-up to the King K. Rool boss fight. The surface having a giant K. Rool statue is already a fantastic start, but I also love how this reveals that pretty much every enemy from throughout the adventure was an old enemy from previous Donkey Kong games. Then once you get underground, the true build-up begins, sort of reminding me of the Moon Cave from Mario Odyssey. I will say though, I think Donkey Kong Bananza did this just a bit better. Although this doesn't have dry bones, so maybe not. But we get to see a ton of pretty difficult challenges here with some turf surfing, long enemy fights, and even a mini-boss. On top of all that, exploration does still exist here, so we can find a bunch of different fossils and bananas on the way. Also, the big fossil is so retro. Now this level is the big exception to the large layer rule I mentioned earlier, as it only has 30 standard fossils as opposed to 61. That also goes with a smaller banana total with only 23. That made this quite difficult to place in the list, but luckily the end of this layer makes up for the lower amount of content. King K. Rool is the massive exception to the boss fights being pretty mid to bad in this game, as this fight is fantastic. First you face off against him in the Planet Core, which was already a pretty solid challenge. Even with it allowing you to stay in your Bonanza forms indefinitely, it is still hard to whittle his health down. I really liked how you could speed the fight up by hitting his cannonballs back. That by itself was already by far the hardest and best fight in the game, but King K. Rool doesn't go down that easily. After beating him for the first time and making our wish to return to the surface, we get ourselves a fake credit scene and a very familiar song. I was waiting for a remix of Gangplank Galleon the second King K. Rool showed up, and having it blast while we shoot up a tower of bananas was fantastic. I honestly think I might like this version of the song even more than the Smash version, which is a huge accomplishment. This section is also great as you have to try and stay alive on the banana tower by throwing chunks at K. Rool. This would honestly also be a pretty good ending, but that's still not the end. Eventually, we do reach the surface and arrive in New Donk City. Yeah, I was pointing at my screen like crazy. Having K. Rool return for a boss fight in a kingdom from Mario Odyssey was an ending way better than I could have anticipated. After finally reaching New Donk City Hall through an intense sequence, we get the true final boss, and it is pretty challenging. I will say this is the one part of the game where you can definitely feel the frame rate suffer, but beside that, I love this fight so much. Dodging all of his attacks and slowly chipping away at his health while using all of the different Bonanza forms was a blast. So yeah, while this layer may not have that many bananas, it certainly has the best sequence in the entire game. I mean, I managed to talk about this the most out of any layer, so I think that should absolutely speak towards its quality. It's hard for me to put it much higher since I do value exploration quite a bit, but wow, that was an incredible ending. Shouldn't New Donk City count as its own layer? 1. The Feast layer. Getting some very strong Luncheon vibes here. While this is another food-based lava level, there are still quite a few differences from Luncheon. For one, the food here is a lot less angular, which already gives us a very different vibe. But that's also mixed with the fact that this layer is set up to be a sort of amusement park. I thought that was a really cool mix, and it was fun being able to use the several different minecarts to traverse the layer. I also liked the approach the story took here, as we basically had to go around exploring the amusement park to find 5 burger switches, bosses, which was a very fun adventure. Of course, I can't go on too long without mentioning the main gimmick of this level, the salt. This was pretty interesting, I thought. Throughout the course, you'll see a ton of green goo, and the only way to destroy it is by finding salt and throwing it at it. I thought this was a pretty cool mechanic, and it's used really well throughout the 69 bananas found in the entire course. There are also several enemies that are made of slime, and it always feels satisfying to hit them with salt and see them dissolve away. That also goes for the layer's main boss, which is actually quite enjoyable. Muckety Muck is also made out of the green slime, so you have to try and throw salt at it, all while avoiding its attacks. This is definitely one of the more solid bosses. And on top of that, we even get to see the return of the Mad Mixer boss that I really liked in the canyon layer. This time he uses a mix of salt and bombs, which adds even more to this fight that I already enjoyed the first time. And on top of everything I already mentioned, I like how there's even a bit of hidden lore here. It seems to be implied that the Lion Elder died before your arrival, so this sort of acts as a memento to him, which I think is pretty cute. And also I think it's cool how there's just like a spooky graveyard randomly in this amusement park. So yeah, I love basically everything about this layer. I'm not sure if it's a confident #1 choice, but I couldn't see it placing anywhere else on my list. Having one of the most creative themes on top of a pretty fun gimmick just made me a huge fan of this place. So for me, at least for right now, the Feast layer is going to be taking #1 as my favorite layer in Donkey Kong Bananza. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you despise giraffes and hate me for ranking the Canyon Kingdom so high? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot of fun making this video, even if I do predict it'll likely perform a lot worse than my normal output. I might do some more Bananza videos in the future because I really enjoyed the game. An all banana ranking would be a lot of fun, though I'm not 100% on doing it just yet because of the huge time commitment. Also, I do have to mention that this was a challenge to write the script for because every time I typed layers, I put Kingdom instead. I'm sure me saying Kingdom slipped into the video somewhere. I'm clearly just too Odyssey brained. But before I go, I've got to thank my members, being Tibby, Drybones, Fredbear's Diner, Mario Master 101, Maidzio2, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Nuclear, Cassie Channel, Luma, Blessed Tiger, Yanni the Duck, Wyatt Derpy, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Kid Trunks 15, Caddy Shroom, Enchanted Skull, SMA, B-Major 2003, Arson the Raboot, Sir Moosty, Belandor, Diluted Colors, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Pronto Clone, Thicky Reiki, Ungenio TM, CW McCain, JubeTube, Tesseract, Mr. McMahon 5702, Jameson Pageson, Golden Sunshine 15, Z Frost, Stuffy Ant, Justex, Concanut, Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.